Welcome to Three Distinct Knocks. I'm David Riley, and
I'm Nicholas Harvey.
And today we're going to be joined by Jason Mitchell, who we'll tell you a little bit more about in a minute. But first, let's do today's rant. We often talk about the problem of retention in Freemasonry. In many lodges, in most perhaps even, it's common to have a candidate entered, passed, and raised, and then vanish from the active life of the lodge. He may continue to pay his dues for a time, but eventually he's suspended for non-payment. While we continue to fret about the problem and theorize as to its cause, it keeps happening. The problem is complex and there are many causes. I'm not going to offer a panacea tonight. But one underlying cause is our failure to appropriately manage the expectations of candidates. Freemasonry is a peculiar institution in many ways, but one of the ways in which its plan eludes many candidates is that it is the custom of the fraternity to heap upon a man titles and honors and then expect that he will labor to earn them. Undergoing the ceremonies of being entered, passed, and raised in the best of circumstances provides a man a powerful initiatory experience. He should feel changed. He should feel as if a new world has opened to him. But he will not have the secrets of the universe laid bare before his eyes, nor will a perfect understanding of the experience be immediately given to him. Freemasonry guards her secrets jealously, even from the initiated. She reveals them haltingly, slowly, shyly, carefully, step by careful step. It is this that is meant when we describe Freemasonry as progressive science. That is, a particular branch of knowledge in which one makes progress in a systemic fashion. I have heard men who should know better, who have been advanced to positions of leadership and responsibility in our craft, say that the purpose of Freemasonry is merely good fellowship, or to advance public philanthropy, and that the ritual, however much time we spend on it, is merely an archaic and outmoded way of reinforcing these values. In short, it isn't worth studying. But many men of great intellect and excellent education have found Masonic ritual and philosophy worthy of study. Innumerable volumes of admittedly varying quality and usefulness have been written about the craft. Pike, Oliver, Hall, Wilmshurst, Mackey, and many, many more have devoted great portions of their lives to the study of the philosophy and ritual of Freemasonry and to explaining it to others. Every Master Mason has a responsibility to make progress in the science of his craft. It is his profession. And while the Grand Lodge has every right to set the ritual and to govern its subordinate lodges, ancient Masonic tradition affords each Master Mason the opportunity, no, the right and obligation to make sense of those rituals himself. But we don't do this alone. In isolation, our thoughts may turn upon themselves and errors replicate without correction. We examine our ritual and offer our thinking on its meaning. We explore our philosophy and its significance in our lives as part of a community, a band of brothers. Together, we seek truth. And so we talk with brothers after lodge and offer an idea which gets explored and strengthened or rejected. We read the works of those who have walked our path before us and engage their ideas. Steadily, slowly, over the course of a lifetime, we make progress in understanding. Freemasonry, in a sense, is not a single tradition. The influences that have shaped and guided our fraternity are innumerable. It is rather like a great river. Many rivers flow into the Mississippi, and when you reach the Delta, if you dip a cup into the waters of the river, it is impossible to tell from which tributary that water originated. This makes Freemasonry a rich field of inquiry. It means there is always more to explore, that the final version is never written, the right answer is never found. Instead, what we have is a substitute that is the best each man can do for himself at this time, a substitute we use until at some future age we discover the right. If we explain to candidates at the beginning that we are initiating them into a society that is on a quest that will take their lifetime and more, a quest for meaning, for truth, for a better life and a better way of being a man, then they will not expect that Freemasonry will reveal all at the first. And perhaps, just perhaps, we will gain more companions in our journey. And now to talk a little bit about making the Masonic education experience worthwhile for new Masons, we have Brother Jason A. Mitchell. Brother Mitchell received the degrees of Freemasonry in Wasatch Lodge. Is that correct?
What's that?
That is correct.
Wasatch Lodge number 1, F&AM of Utah, and served as its worshipful master in 2008. He is a 32nd degree Master of the Royal Secret of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite, and was coronated 33rd degree Inspector General Honorary in 2013. He has done everything you can do, I think, looking at his Masonic resume and the York Rite.
There's even words I've never heard of at all.
Yeah.
What is that one?
Red Branch of Erie?
No, that word.
Melchizedek? First High Priest of Israel. What's wrong with you?
Oh!
Yeah.
I'm an anointed high priest after the order of Melchizedek. Isn't everybody? Anyway, including receiving the Red Cross of Constantine, and he currently serves as the chief adept of the Utah College of SRCF, and as governor of the York Rite Sovereign College, Camp Floyd College, number 190. I think that establishes his bona fides, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, it's long enough to where this dude's done everything. Anyway, welcome.
Well, he hasn't done our podcast
He
yet.
hasn't?
I haven't.
Today you can add that to your resume, Brother Mitchell.
That's the final ticket punch. I've got a full set now.
Masonic degrees are like Pokemon. You have to collect them all.
He's going to go to his wife and be like, honey, it's over. I have it.
Yeah.
So a question that I often like to ask men who got really involved, over-involved in the fraternity is, what was your experience of joining like? What was it? What was that experience for you?
It's been a while. I got to remember. So the lodge I ultimately joined was probably about the third or fourth I actually investigated. So the process for me was about 2 or 3 years of actually looking at lodges, looking at the people who were involved, getting to kind of know them and seeing what personalities were going to mesh or not mesh, whether or not these were people who, you know, were good people, but maybe not. I didn't necessarily have anything real in common with them. I was 23 when I joined, so, you know, I think we can all agree that, you know, Bob, the guy from World War II, is awesome, but there's some big generational gotchas there that I at least had the wherewithal to try to avoid going in. And I have that in part because my family on my mom's side does have a Masonic history, but they never talked about it. They were part of that generation that just, you know, lodge was lodge and you didn't bring it home. So, but I had at least a general idea that the Masonic population was aging, and that I wanted to see if there were lodges that had escaped that, and I was happy to find one. The other side of the process for me is I had actually read Morals and Dogma twice before I petitioned.
Hey, look at another person. You have a friend now.
So I had a really good idea of what I was looking for, and I knew that I could, if I shopped around long enough or looked hard enough, that it could be a door to get to where I was going. I was happy to find out that it was true. I could get there, but I was also happy to find out that a lot of my assumptions from reading that were wrong, at least in the lodge I joined. The lodge I joined at the time had an average age of 47. So in the early aughts, that was a huge skew compared to the national average. And the lodge was active and it was energetic, and we, for some odd reason, had a group of past masters that I don't know if it was out of endorsement or it was out of spirit of we're just going to let these new upstarts have enough rope to hang themselves, but they got out of people's way. And consequently, we were successful. So, I mean, yeah, it was a 2 or 3 year process of actively investigating it, but it was probably all told maybe 5 years from the time I was still in the Marines and actually kind of decided this was a direction I was going to go and started reading up on the fraternity so I could have some knowledge of it before I actually put my foot in the door.
But what was the actual Masonic education as you joined? What was it? Just the traditional catechism? Was there something more? Was it less?
So I mean, I got lucky. It was through no great effort of my own. It was pure luck that the lodge I joined happened to have the right blend of leadership and talent. That it had an inertia to it. So yeah, there was the standard catechisms that occurred. You had to learn them, you had to memorize them, you had to go forward. But the education largely occurred after lodge. It occurred outside the lodge. It occurred, at diners, plumbing the depths of bottomless cups of coffee. The aprons were all in the car. I didn't know that 2 or 3 people at the table were a past grand whatchamacallit, because the aprons didn't matter. We were just there taking it all in. And I was lucky enough to have a seat at that table. And that was 90% of my early Masonic education. It was right there.
I think one of the things that makes an early Masonic experience really valuable is having those guys who have been around forever, who have a real depth of knowledge, but who also have the personality to walk up to a new guy and treat him with respect, so that he doesn't feel like he's being lectured or he's being told the way it's supposed to be or how it used to be. He's being engaged and asked for his opinion equally. That whole thing about meeting on the level.
So, again, I can't stress how lucky I was that there were men of that sort of character that were willing to step back and say, here, just sit down, listen, talk, have some coffee, have a cigar, and just pontificate on 30 years of Masonry from their perspective and from their point of view. And furthermore, if I had a question, introduce me to other people in their circles that would have the answers that they couldn't provide.
Right.
And it's sad to me. It's sad to me as someone who has become, quote unquote, a Masonic leader or a leader of Masons, that we can't replicate that. I was lucky that we can't build somehow into the training of leaders of the lodge how to make that sort of culture and how to make that sort of tribal and communal knowledge happen.
Well, I think one of the problems that we have is that we put the wrong people in charge of things. Masonic education in particular, we tend to put guys in charge of things like Masonic education and training programs, the programmatic part of it, coming out of Grand Lodges, who are not pedagogues. They're corporate guys. They're finance guys.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't know anything about teaching, much less teaching adults. Yeah, I had the advantage when I started doing Masonic education in my lodge. I had spent a couple of years working for an adult education organization. I'm a nonprofit fundraiser. And I'd spent a couple of years hanging out with people who were experts in adult education. And I'm far from an expert, but some of what they had taught me, some of what they knew had rubbed off on me. When you do enough grant writing for those people, you eventually learn something about what they do, whether you want to or not.
Yep.
And so when I started doing Masonic education, I started with the assumption that you have to, simple things like you have to respect the education that the person's bringing into the room to begin with. Adults totally tune out if you start treating them as if they don't know anything to begin with. But I think a lot of Grand Lodge programs start with that as an assumption, So what if you could design a perfect experience for a new guy coming in, not the ritual part of it, but the learning about the fraternity, learning the catechism, but also learning what those words mean. What would that experience look like?
Well, where are we starting? Are we starting? He's an entered apprentice, or are we starting?
Yeah, he's an entered apprentice.
So he's an entered apprentice, just got initiated.
So I would say that if you're starting at the point that he's an entered apprentice, you're already at least a year too late.
A year too late.
A year too late.
Where would you start?
So, now, understanding that most Grand Lodges have probably gone to the 6-month you have to know someone model, but we look at this the wrong way. We look at this as an obstacle. We look at this as something that has to be overcome, and we don't look at it as a time to groom the candidate and vet the candidate. I would say that you start no later than 6 months, but ideally a year out, when that person says, hey, I'm interested in becoming a Mason. All right, awesome. Here we go. Every month we have X. My lodge did it. We called it a meetup, but every lodge can do it however they want. But while you're getting to know them and they're getting to know you, to check that box, that's where we're starting to establish, what are you looking for in Masonry? What are you bringing to the table? What do we have that attracted you? And in addition to just finding out whether or not the lodge is going to mesh, you're giving that guy the chance to actually learn about Masonry. When he comes in with questions, or worse, has no questions, that's when you start talking to him about, what is Masonry? What are we about? How long have we been around? What are the basic knowledge that this guy's going to have to walk in the door to learn? Regardless of how do you salute the master, what's the name of that guy, what's the title of this, what's the name of the degree again? This guy should come in here with a year of primed knowledge and reading to hit the ground running. The military does it. They call it boot camp. Because while, yes, in theory, you're a member of the armed services while you're in boot camp, all boot camp does is basically give you a chance to get into the culture of the military service without making a real big embarrassment of yourself.
Yeah,
we could argue as to the success of that, and over the long term, I think they've proven it right. But there's always the special students that really challenge the system. But yeah, no, I would say if you're starting Masonic education the night that they're initiated, you're already behind the curve. You've missed at least 6 months of opportunity.
I used to joke with candidates that the first great rule in Freemasonry, my mother lodge is amicable. The first rule in Freemasonry is that amicable made you a Mason. You can go and do anything else you want in the fraternity, but you should always have your first loyalty be to the lodge. And the second great rule of Freemasonry is do not embarrass David Riley. And by that, I meant, I meant that you don't, the whole purpose of having an education process along the way is so that a guy can be familiar with the history of the fraternity, the etiquette of the fraternity, the culture of the fraternity. Let's face it, Freemasonry has had enough time to get weird and cranky and have its own way of doing things. And It takes time for a guy to learn that. And at the end of it, I wanted every candidate from my lodge to be able to go to another lodge and not just not embarrass my mother lodge, but to feel comfortable attending another lodge.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that, at least for the system that my lodge had for the time that it was doing it, I mean, what better way to do that than to break bread with people? There are guys coming in, they have no concept of dining etiquette. Well, here's your chance. Just because it's a Chili's doesn't mean it can't be educational on, we're Masons, we dine, we have a table lodge. Breaking bread, the divine feast, is part of our culture and our experience. Learn it now and make that part of that onboarding process. If that guy is so absolutely and fundamentally incapable or undesirable of wanting to learn table manners, Well, there's another organization for him. Maybe in time he'll circle back around and come to ours. Or at the concept of interacting with people with whom you have very profound and different opinions. I'd rather take care of that during the pre-petition phase than find out when they're a fellow craft and I take them to visit another lodge that this guy is an ardent insert political party here and can't stand someone with an opposing opinion. And that this is the first time in their life that they've actually ever had to try to have a polite conversation with them, which is an increasing question in my mind because I'm becoming older and ornery and cantankerous. And the men joining the fraternity are now being born after I even graduated high school. And yeah, at 18, fresh out of high school, these guys probably have never really had a chance to learn how to have a disagreement with somebody and learn how to come to a point where we're never going to agree with each other, but I love you for it, so let me buy you a beer.
All right. One of the great pillars of my mother lodge for many years was our perennial chaplain. And he and I did not agree on politics. He was a minister. He and I did not agree on theology. He came out of a very conservative Wesleyan tradition, which isn't my. So we had our very technical disagreements on theology that wouldn't matter to anybody else, but mattered to us. Yep. And we just didn't disagree. Outside the lodge, we didn't agree on a whole lot. But what we did agree on was that we had a great deal of respect for each other and admiration for each other. I admired the work that he did. And he retired and moved away, and we still exchange Christmas cards every year. I am friends with his son. I know everything that's going on in it, but it's a real genuine friendship that would have never happened in any other context, because in any other context we would have been on opposite sides of the fence. Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, it's, the guys that I end up missing the most are the quote unquote intransigent, I can't talk tonight, past masters who would constantly butt heads with me and would never agree, and nothing I did was ever good enough. Nothing they ever did was good enough for me. And the minute I got to the East, the ones that I needed, the anchors, were the ones that I had regrettably all for the past preceding 7 years said goodbye to.
Mm-hmm.
It's those are the ones that I needed. I needed the people to challenge me. I needed the ones that forced me out of my comfort zone and to grow as a person. Whether I was right or wrong in the opinion, or they were right and wrong in the opinion, I grew more from those disagreements in learning how to disagree than I probably ever did from someone who had the exact same idea as me.
Yeah, I was talking to a current master, and he said that being in the East will reveal to you every single weakness you have in your personality and every single flaw you have as a human being, and will rub your nose in it. And that it would be a kindness if those people who knew you best would take you aside beforehand and explain to you what those were.
Yeah.
It is true that there's nothing like being in a room full of guys who know you really well. You've been a Mason for some time, presumably, before you end up as master of the lodge. My lodge, before I became master, they'd been with me while my mother died. They'd been with me, through a period of joblessness and through having a great job that I loved, and then having that job vanish in front of me. They'd seen me at my best and at my worst, and they still decided to put me in charge of something that they really love. There's nothing quite like that.
No, there isn't, is there?
There's nothing quite like the experience of watching all your little personality quirks, the things that you think of as harmless eccentricities, come and bite you.
Yeah.
I think I was having a story with a guy who says he doesn't like that his lodge votes pretty much every petition in. that the investigation committee basically says, yeah, he's good. We met with him twice. You know, I mean, he's the guy that he sits in the corner. You know him at dinner. He sits in the corner. He's like, he said, yeah, he doesn't like how they just always blindly vote everybody in because they need members. And I think it wasn't until recently that I realized through something you and I are going through that you don't need 200 guys, 300 guys. You just need a handful of guys that you could sit around and be like, I'm going to give you the next year of my life and we're going to do something and I will do everything on God's green earth to make this succeed.
Yeah. Having the right 10 guys is way better than having the wrong 100 guys.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So what reading do you recommend for new Masons?
Oh, you're just going to jump into that, huh?
Manly P. Hall?
So, yeah, no. You know, and here's the part that people tend to not understand. If a guy comes to me and says, "Hey, I'm Mr. Esoteric, and I want in on esoteric masonry," and they may have a scholastic or academic or even an esoteric background. I recommend everyone start at the exact same place in terms of their Masonic education. The ritual. If you don't know the ritual, you don't know Masonry. I'm a believer that Masonry is orthopraxic more than it is orthodoxic. And if you can't get that praxis down, then you're not adhering to the tradition, because that's what makes us distinct. That's what separates us, is that ritual. It's what we do.
When you say
why we're
knowing
not
the
the
ritual, what do you mean? Because I know people that'll say, you need to know the obligation, the entire thing without messing up, forwards and backwards, morning, noon, and night for the rest of your life. And then you're a Mason. If you don't know it, if you forgot a few words, forget it. So when you say ritual, what do you mean?
I mean what we would normally consider as the ritual, meaning the opening, the closing, the charges, the actual conferral of the degree, the lecture. And depending on how your Grand Lodge code is structured, that may even consider the code, but for purposes of education, I would say you better know the code. Because whether you know the code or not is what really determines what you think about Masonry. I don't know how many times I hear someone bitch and moan about, well, Grand Lodge is just trying to screw us over. And then I look at his apron and he's a past master, and it's like, dude, you are in Grand Lodge. And only to come to find out that he came through a lodge that wanted 100 people more than 10 people, and they never invested him in any training, and he gamed the system, not even knowing that the system was being gamed. The concept of reading the code, novel to him. He wouldn't even know how to find it, let alone read it or cross-reference it. So, I mean, before we get into the philosophy of Masonry, I'm a believer, I come from the school that you got to know the ritual. You got to read the code. You've got to have above working knowledge level of the tradition that you are a member of and ostensibly protecting. That is to say, in theory, if you're a Master Mason, you're eligible for election to a warden's chair and thus to the East. And whether you like it or not, or whether you're qualified or not per se as a leader, it may come to you at some point in time to pass this tradition on. And if you can't do the ritual, if you can't get the praxis down, how the hell are you going to get the orthodoxy down? And so when a guy says, I want to start Masonic education, okay, let's start. Let's go through the lecture. Let's go through the ritual. Let's get it so you got at least a basic rote knowledge of that. Let's cram those symbols so hard into your subconscious that we can start using that as a foundation to build upon other philosophical systems that Masonry has borrowed, stolen, liberated from over the centuries, and you can start making the internal connect the dots.
Yeah, I do think that there's a huge difference between rote memorization of the ritual, to which I have no objection. I have a tremendous amount of ritual floating around in my head. I'm a past master. I'm a past high priest. I've done my share of memorizing. But I think there's a difference between memorizing the ritual and understanding the ritual.
Well, I mean, the question is, where do we start? So not where we want to end up. Where we want to end up is past that rote memorization. I think where we screwed up in Masonry, going all the way back to Jeremy Ladcross, who's famous for saying, as he's spreading the web ritual across the U.S., if you would just learn this like I did, you'd know everything I do about Masonry. And somehow, because everyone loves Jeremy Ladcross, that became like the benchmark of Masonic education. And Pike comments on it, Mackey comments on it. This is something that we built into our system at the turn of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that's where you start. That's not where you end up. I mean, so if an EA wants to come in and learn Masonry, and he really wants to delve into the philosophical context of it, and he wants to engage it at a near Jungian level, let's say, okay, you better learn it. You better know it. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself out there falling prey to the people who really have no interest in anything other than your pocketbook, or you're going to end up going out on the internet and saying something and embarrassing David Riley.
I think there's a balance that has to happen there, though, because for me, and I think for a significant percentage of candidates, there's a balance between rote memorization and understanding. I always find it easier to memorize if I understand the meaning and the intent and the context of the words. And I find it more difficult. Massachusetts is one of the states that isn't part of the General Grand Chapter, so our ritual is slightly different from that of many of the other states. But there's a line in the Royal Arch lecture that I had a horrible time memorizing, simply because I literally could not get the sense of it.
Yeah.
It was one of those grammatical constructs. I swear that sentence didn't have a verb. Anyway, and I asked one of the grand lecturers, and he laughingly said, "You have the words right. Why do you need anything else?" That's like, because I fight for it every time. And then eventually one day I read something and it made that one sentence click. It made a little more sense, and I didn't have to fight for it every time that I was trying to do the ritual suddenly. So I think there's a balancing act between rote memorization and some level of understanding of what the ritual means. But I agree with you that the starting place for Freemasonry is always the ritual, because that's what makes us different. Take the ritual away and we're a second-rate Rotary.
Yeah, emphasis on the second rate, because what they do excellently.
Yeah.
And I don't know that many Masons understand just how, if they say that we're into the game of, oh, we're a charity, wow, are we not really good at that game? Because the number of charities out there that just kick ass at doing what they do, it would boggle the mind of lodges, I think, if they understood. Oh no!
No, you're back. All right, you're here.
All right. Now my battery's my battery's dying. Hold on.
Okay.
Let me plug in. Same unplugged.
We'll now take a short break to tell you about our sponsors, vitriolshop.com, owned by a wonderful brother in Massachusetts.
Sorry.
Come to our website and
It's
get it.
because I had to move the camera.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I blame you.
Nick.
Hey, I was right in the middle of an ad for Vitriol Shop, where you get great Masonic t-shirts. Go to our website to find a, 15% off coupon?
15% discount.
That's a lot.
That is a lot, especially for such
All right, are we still
well-done
connected?
unique t-shirts.
What?
Let me get my headset back on. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no problem.
Take a breather.
We can edit it out.
We won't, though. Point the camera down. So all we see is your head. Can you point it down a little bit? So you want to build one of these at your house?
Yeah. but on the
More.
back of my roll top desk.
Can't do that.
You said it was your idea.
Well, yeah, I was going to convince you to replace the desk. Give Nathan the desk.
No.
Hey, we're back.
Are we?
Sorry, it came unplugged when I had to slide the camera over before.
No problem. You want to tilt the camera down a little bit? Keep seeing you. Your face.
There we
What's
go.
wrong with the mice? Are you saying I don't have a good ceiling?
But you have a better tie.
Oh, well, my wife would think the ceiling sucks. So thank you for not agreeing with her and making me have to go buy paint for this weekend.
I heard what you said about the ceiling. It's getting painted this weekend. All right. So we were somewhere.
So how do you convince a candidate? Like when I did Masonic education for candidates, one of the things that I always jokingly said was that, every candidate has their own particular interests. Some of them are into the esoteric, some of them are into the history, some of them are but it all starts with the ritual. Then my joke was, if after they finished the candidate education process in the lodge, if after that they, of their own free will,
And accord.
went out and read a book about some aspect of Freemasonry, then I was done. I had accomplished my goal. They were on their own. Fly, little birdie.
Yeah, it's, I don't know that I have a good answer to this. We were joking before we started the show that, I've been in a lot of different bodies and headed several of them. So I have a really good, strong working knowledge of how not to do education. But I don't know that I've really come across, for lack of a better word, a silver bullet or even what would get a majority of people engaged. I absolutely believe it comes down to setting expectations with the candidate. I mean, we agree 100% there. And asking them flat out, what are you looking for in Masonry? Why are you here? And as you go through the catechism and as they come up through the degrees, setting them up so they can meet the right people or get invited to the right events, that they can fulfill and understand that expectation. I used to kind of take the same approach as you. In fact, I did for a long time, whereas if we could simply catalyze passion, right? And they would go run off on their own. That was successful. That they're now self-sufficient. They have the initiative and discipline and at least a couple places where they know they could go run to, and that was the best we could hope for. Increasingly over the last couple of years, my attitudes have begun to change on that, especially in considering Masonry as an orthopraxy versus an orthodoxy, and looking at how other traditional communities set themselves up and perpetuate themselves. The question of indoctrination or education for them is continual. That is to say, if you look at a Buddhist, they all may have very different ideas on what it means to go look at the moon, but during their holy month, they will get on a platform and they go out and they will recite prayers and poems and set aside that time to do this. You look at a traditional community such as, even the Christian church, not from the religious point of view, but from the traditional point of view. At certain points of the year during the liturgical calendar, assuming a liturgical church here, don't get me going on that one. I think Dave and I would just agree too much on that one. That it's not accidental that you come around to these feasts of the saints, that we don't come around, that, it's by design. You have these experiences, you come back to these great truths on a cyclical basis and a cyclical nature. And applying that idea or concept to the lodge means education is not just the guy who runs off and does it on his own, but the guy who comes back. The guy who comes to the degrees even though he's a Master Mason of 30 years, because it's important to come back to have this visceral, physical encounter with a ceremony that is meant to encapsulate and partake of and pass on these concepts and ideas and philosophies. I don't know where all that ends, but as I perhaps become a smarter or wiser individual, I can't help but think that maybe that's a key portion that we miss. Though we don't understand it as such, we hide it under the term engagement.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said there that I agree with strongly is that it doesn't count if they don't come back to the lodge. I think that's absolutely right. And I think a part of that is that after all these years, after all the degrees that I've seen, I still have those moments when a particular line of ritual is revealed to me as if new.
Yep.
Often because of the reaction of the candidate to the words, or because of the way, less often because of the way a particular man who's performing that bit of ritual says it, or less often because of my particular place in life at that moment. But all of a sudden, I noticed something I've never noticed before, something that I've never paid attention to before, some connection, some understanding just comes to me. And that doesn't happen if you don't come back. It doesn't happen if you don't engage in the ritual over and over and over again. And it also doesn't happen even if you do come back, but you sit in the secretary's chair, having been a secretary, and you do your best to ignore what's happening in the lodge and shuffle papers and complain that, it took them 17 minutes to raise that guy, and you can do it in 12. Hurry up, you're wasting my time. I need to get home. Then it doesn't happen either.
No, it doesn't. I mean, to wax esoteric for a second, I mean, that's the tarot. That's the fool's journey, right? To come, as you said, in that experience about the ritual, to come back to the place where you've started and see it again for the first time, and see it from someplace new. Whether, as you say, I'm the secretary, but I think if anyone who's been in Masonry long enough, we all generally agree that our favorite part in the lodge, in terms of ritual, is senior deacon. I mean, he's the guy that sets the tempo in the web work. He's the guy that does everything. Everyone else is just sitting there. But, and the reason why people enjoy it is because for the first time, they're actually getting to see the degree with any sort of basis of understanding or knowledge or training. The ritual is buried into their head. It's in their subconscious. They've done it for a year or two now. And it's somewhat unfortunate that we don't give more men that opportunity to come back and say, guess what you're doing tonight? I don't know. What am I doing tonight? You're junior steward. Here's the questions.
Right.
Go. Because you don't learn, you don't really get those aha experiences. You don't get those moments of learning if you're always coming back and doing what, our favorite phrase in Masonry, what we've always done before.
Mm.
If what you've always done before, sit on the sideline, well, you're not advancing. You've just been at that, you've been in that position for 30 years. You've got 30 years experience, not as a Mason, you got 30 years experience as a sideliner.
I also think that the one reason people love senior deacon is because it's the place where you can have the closest to the candidate experience. Again, you really are right there with the candidate throughout, and I think it makes a real impression on people when they do that work.
So, but yeah, it's so the question of Mason, how do we craft a better educational system, which to me is tied in how do we have a better engagement system. It starts to rapidly get scary and get into some very unknown territories, because the question demands lodges do work whether there's a candidate or not. It demands that everyone in the lodge have an equal opportunity at all the ritual parts that their Grand Lodge code allows them to have access to, which means you can't have a lodge of 1,000 men. You can only have a lodge of 10 to 27, which causes us to fundamentally rethink how we approach Masonry, and more importantly, the institutions thereof.
So I think one of the things that both David and you actually have helped me with a lot is with the many conversations you and I have per week, both of you guys actually. You guys say a lot of names and quote a lot of books and talk about a lot of pieces of history that I don't know. But when I was raised, I wasn't necessarily immediately interested in the esoteric. I kind of, to Jason's point, I wanted to learn everything we do in the lodge and what it means. And then I wanted to start working my way backwards. When I talk to people, it either goes one of two ways. They either want the esoteric and the Manly P. Hall, and they want to like, Worshipful Master's the brain and the Senior Warden's the heart or something. And the other guys were like, I just want to know how we got here. And so my question for both of you is, because we do want to give our listeners and ourselves more education, is Jason, if someone wanted to learn the history, if they wanted to start going down the path of how exactly we got this Webb ritual and Anderson's constitutions and that quote you said about some burning of some papers in a church or something, what are some good authors or some good books or some good references just to point them down that path of just history, no esotericism, nothing like that, just where we got to where we are today?
Well, for me, that's a hard question to answer, because the philosophy of Masonry and the history of Masonry are one and the same, at least in terms of how I approach them. I can't compartmentalize them so nicely. I would argue that if you want to start with people, or you want to start with just getting a command of the grasp of the history of Masonry, start with your lodge and start with your Grand Lodge. That's where I started. I actually went to my Grand Lodge library and read all the proceedings back to 1872.
It doesn't sound that exciting.
You know, oddly enough, the farther back I got, the more exciting it became.
Why?
Well, even setting aside some of the peccadillos of the bigotry that existed in Utah for a period of time, and regrettably that did carry over into the craft, as you got closer and closer to ground zero of the creation of Masonry, not only did the general education and quality of writing for the men involved in the craft increase, but there were no institutions. There were no, this is the way we've always done it before. There was nothing that they were seeking to protect. So instead of arguing from the point of view of what's institutionally right, they argued from the point of view of what they believed Masonry was. And in doing that, it became far more interesting. It became far more engaging than, well, we made this change in 19 blah 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 to deal with the inefficiencies of the ritual and as it pertained to advancing candidates before they went to war. Okay, that's an organizational thing, right? That's fun, that's cool. Right. But it's not the same as sitting down and actually having a chance to read the personal thoughts of the first Grand Master. It's not the same as when the Deputy Grand Master started calling other officers to task because he didn't feel that they really understood what it was that they were getting themselves involved in and was using a bully pulpit, for lack of a better term, to try to educate the Grand Lodge officers on what it meant to be Masons when these guys were probably Masons all of 6 months. They were just the ones that showed up and or had money or could be there, so they got installed, regardless of how long they were in the craft or not. And that's a lot more engaging, I think, than the organizational efficiency question. But in doing that, that opened up doors, and that opened up names, and that opened up other places for me to start looking and expanding my historical research. So I mean, that's how I approached it. It seems to be successful for me. Are there better ways out there? Probably, no doubt. You could ask like Art de Hoyos, on the qualities of actual historical research and how many sources, or citations a source should have, and who are the people who do this that have any sort of demonstrated history of generally being right more than they're generally wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That said, one thing that I always throw out and always question is, if there's a TV show on it about the History Channel, I pretty much consider that that's wrong. So if the History Channel is saying, oh, look at the Masons and the Templars, okay, not going to even invest in that. I know where that's going to go.
It was all ancient aliens anyway.
It was. Tsoukalos was right. We should just give them the check and just call it a game. So yeah, no, but aside, and it's, I say that despite the fact that I've been proven wrong on that so many times. And the great example of that is the Royal Order of Scotland, which, yes, ties into that Templar narrative, but also suggests that Masonry comes out of, at least a strong proto form of Masonry comes out of Scotland. Not to upset any of your English or Irish listeners. And that's, encapsulated in, Écossais Masonry and Hautesgrade Masonry in France. But the truth is, you look at the historical evidence, yeah, there was absolutely proto-Masonry in Scotland. We see at the court of Charles, Ashmole and Mackey there, referring to each other as Master Masons. They're sitting there at Edsel Castle, famous for its quote-unquote Rosicrucian garden, but what is that garden? It is an architectural edifice dedicated to moral instruction. That sounds an awful lot like Freemasonry, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you look at what's going on with the lodges, Edinburgh Lodge and Etchkinson Haven Lodge and John Boswell. Clearly there was something going on that had already occurred where the guild company had moved. Now, you do see parallels of that down with the London Company of Freemasons as well. We just don't have quite as good documentary evidence for it. But, if you throw out the Templar theory entirely, then you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and you miss that entire form of proto-Masonry that's occurring in Scotland. And you miss it traveling down from York, down through Stirling, down into London, where it makes the big jump with the London fire, as London becomes the first city since Rome where there's 1 million people and all the Masonic traditions are coming together and rebuilding this great nation. Well, actually, it's a new nation. This is late 18th century Great Britain. It's not even Great Britain or the United Kingdom yet. That doesn't happen until 1707. And so, but generally speaking, yeah, I would say the thing you could do is throw away. If it's on the History Channel, throw it away. You're not going to find the mysteries of Oak Island there.
Well, I never sat down and read the Massachusetts proceedings all the way through. I do agree with you that looking at the Grand Lodge proceedings can be really valuable. And I absolutely agree with you that looking at the history of your own lodge, I'm lucky. I come from a lodge that started in 1805. And so we have more history to dig through. and so it's easier to find high points.
Right.
But when I was looking at the proceedings at one point, for example, the first master of Amicable Lodge after the anti-Masonic period was a man named Lucius Page. And Lucius basically used his position in the community. He was a minister and the town clerk and a well-respected man in the community. And he basically used his position in the community to make it acceptable to be a Mason. You know, well, if Lucius is leading it, surely they don't actually sacrifice babies at midnight.
Right.
And Lucius has the distinction, I believe it's still the case, that he was the longest serving permanent member of the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts.
Oh, wow.
And so I went and found the last quarterly session of the Grand Lodge that Lucius attended, where he spoke. And at that point, he was ill, and he showed up basically to ask them not to nominate him for any positions because he couldn't do it anymore.
Right.
And then he spoke about some other things, and he closed by saying, as my eyesight is failing, I cannot see the countenance of my brethren, but hearing their voices here today, my spirits are lifted and my heart is filled. And every time I think about that, I get chills. Here's a man who'd been a Mason for decades and who had given a tremendous amount of his life to the fraternity. And that at the end of his life, he knew he was dying at that point. At the end of his life, that's how he felt about his brethren. The proceedings don't have to be the dry documents that people think they are. They're often quite moving and quite instructive. So the proceedings are a good place to go. If you want to know the history of the ritual, Bob Davis's book, The Mason's Words, is an excellent resource. If you want to an early, you know, in a weird way, I think Bullock's Revolutionary Brotherhood has the best succinct little summary on the formation of the Grand Lodge of England of any book. I mean, it's about Freemasonry and the American Revolution, but he has that chapter on.
Yep, he does.
And I think that's the best short little summary of that time period I've ever read. The rest of the book is very worthwhile, but I for its contribution to the history of how Freemasonry formed, I think that one chapter is particularly good. The resources are out there. Sometimes they require a little digging, but the place where I think most guys should start is go find why you should be proud to be a member of your lodge. What is it that your lodge has contributed to Masonic history? Who are the brethren who have been members of your lodge who are outstanding, whose stories deserve to be remembered and to be told? You know, I can tell you the members of my lodge who are the luminaries of Freemasonry. And every lodge has them, I hope. Every lodge has them.
Well, I mean, at least, I mean, you're right. But in whether or not that individual is a quote-unquote luminary of Masonry in that they have huge international fame, they could be nothing more than, and this is coming out a bit wrong because it's coming out harshly, but they are the luminary of that lodge.
Right, exactly.
They're the luminary, you know, and I mean, if your lodge, and you know, that's the question then, you know, what do you learn about Masonic history? If you can't find anything about your lodge, or your lodge is so new that it hasn't made its mark yet, well then write the history, make it happen. Be that guy, or create the scenario that allows that guy to come to the fore, and you know then you're the one that the historians come back and cite, because you're the first person experience that they want. You know, you were there when it happened. There's no having to go back and finding, you know, the works of people who are 200 or 300 years dead. Yeah. You were the one that was there.
My lodge has the bylaws book signed by every member of the lodge from 1805 to the present. and there are actual signatures all the way through there from 1805
Yep.
to today. And that's a beautiful piece of history, tangible history that the lodge. And I was visiting another lodge, which was very recently formed, and they had the exact same thing. It was 2 pages, but it was the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And there will come a day, I hope for them, when that also is a book this thick. You know, your history is today.
And you know, in a lot of ways, that feeds back to my growing idea that Masonry is orthopraxic, because we do have these relics of the craft. You know, the perennial question on the internet is, what book do you take your obligation on? And I understand the ritual juristic idea that, you know, well, you take it on the book of your faith because, you know, apparently we're all not smart enough to be able to honor obligations unless there's a big guy in the sky pointing a finger at us. But I take the argument of, I take my obligation on the Bible that my lodge has used for the last 150 years. Literally thousands of men have placed their hands upon this book. And in going through this ritual, I am in some way time traveling with them. And we are all coming together in sacred time, sacred space, and I am joining with them. Whether you believe that in the literal sense or you simply understand the magnitude of that, yeah, that's Masonry. That's the cool stuff. Not these arguments about, you know, well, I don't like the King James Bible, so we use the New International Version, or, you know, that's the things we use to distract ourselves from the real questions of Masonry.
That sense of timelessness, of stepping outside of time, is something that I think a lot of the younger guys joining the fraternity are really hungry for, that they're really seeking. And when we throw all these distractions in the way of their finding that, it's really self-defeating for the fraternity, and it's heartbreaking.
It is. You know, how do you wear your ring? On a finger? You know?
If that's your choice.
You know, there's not many different Masonic rites that actually get into the nitty gritty of how you wear your ring. And, you know, we make huge deals out of this, you know, and what's the construction of the apron, and what's the proper shade of purple, and what's the official dimensions of this, that, or the other thing. And, you know, it's, if you go back in time, these are not the questions Masons were fighting over. These were not the things that were causing men to join the fraternity. And it doesn't seem ironic at all that once we've made that the dominant focus of the craft, that sort of proceduralistic attitude, that men don't want to join. They get enough of that at work. So why would they want to come here and listen to someone pontificate about the absurd and historically inaccurate and philosophically unjustifiable arguments of, I wear my ring points in because it's my obligation.
Oh,
you know what? If you actually came to lodge on a regular schedule, you'd be renewing your obligations every time the candidate took theirs. You wouldn't need a ring to remind you.
And I think that's an excellent note to end on. Thank you so much for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. We know ours is a tiny but fierce listenership. And
I hear you guys are taking out after lodge. Any minute now, Harlan's, you know, he's done. Hostile takeover.
You know, rumors of the fight are greatly exaggerated.
Well, I'm happy to exaggerate them if it means Harlan keeps putting out a good product.
Well, Harlan, you know, I'm afraid of his guys because they seem better armed.
Well, yeah, and he's a lawyer.
Well, in fairness, I married a lawyer, so I've got my own.
Well, you know, I grew up in New York, where we all had fights after school. I brought sticks and bats, and the Jewish kids brought lawyers. So I grew up with a healthy fear of the legal team.
That's funny.
Well, thank you so much for doing this with us. We really appreciate it. And Nick, you're doing the outro tonight.
Yeah. So we are grateful for. Oh, well, no, that's not where we start.
We'll edit.
What kind of computer is it?
Back in my day.
Back in my day, we memorized the outro. We didn't read it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. The Grand Lodge preceding outros of 1512. The fantastic photography on our website is courtesy of brother Aaron Sherman. Our theme song is currently under development still, but it's composed by worshipful Christopher Duggan. Our website is maintained, curated, and lovingly tendered by myself. We are grateful for our Patreon sponsors, Jacob Savlik, Uriah Edwards, Arthur Schwellingting, Patrick Harvey, Christopher Patty, David Riley, anybody else that we forgot. And if you'd like to
tell me you had a Patreon.
Clearly you've never heard our podcast or been on our website or our Facebook page.
You good sir are assuming I'm listening at all, even right now.
Thank you. To become well, as you know, Jason, to become a Patreon sponsor, visit our website at 3distinctknocks.org, where you will find additional episodes and other content. For your esoteric and Masonic t-shirts, visit our friends at vitriolshop.com and use code 3DK2017 for 15% off your order. Essential Canine supervision from this episode was provided by Zach and Falula. The opinions expressed in this podcast and on our website are those of the individual contributors and do not represent the opinions of any lodge, Grand Lodge, or other Masonic body. I'm Nicholas Harvey.
I can. I'm chief adept. I can say they count for my college.
There we go. This podcast officially endorsed.
Wow. Okay.
So
I'm Nicholas Harvey.
I'm screwing your outro. I hate that disclaimer. Oh, it bugs the hell out of me.
Oh, see, but you don't live where we live, and you don't get in as much trouble as we get in.
Oh, good sir, you have no idea the amount of trouble I get into on a daily basis. I just happen to belong to a jurisdiction that's already written me off.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm Nicholas Harvey, and I'm incredibly thankful for the brothers that have made this podcast and my Masonic journey so rich, interesting, challenging, and fulfilling. I hope 3 Distinct Knocks has helped you make some daily progress in Freemasonry, and I thank you for listening. And thanks for joining us, Jason.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here, man.
Brother Jason, worshipful knight. What do you even get titled?
Yeah, what's your favorite title?
Oh, yeah, what's your favorite title?
Brother.
Oh, stop. All right. Besides brother, what's your other favorite title?
No, so, I mean, this is one of the things that was, under Masonic education for me is in our jurisdiction, in mine, the Grand Lodge Code actually spells out that you are most worshipful brother blah or worshipful brother blah. And maybe it's just the suburban disaffected youth still coming through. But I hate that. And so I make it a point of, hi, brother so-and-so, who's also worshipful master, right? The title comes after, or the office comes after the name. So you are always just brother. And it's one of the few things in Grand Encampment that I just get giddy about is because they codified that. That's what it is. There is no eminent Sir Knight there's no right eminent Sir Knight. You are simply Sir Knight, so-and-so eminent commander. Oh. And it's every year that's kind of my thing is, getting more and more people on my side so we can put code modifications in Utah to make it that you're just brother.
For me, I'm really happy to be a Knight of the East and West.
Oh, wow.
Where is that from?
The Scottish Rite.
Oh.
Scottish Rite.
Okay.
So at one point in time, think of it like West Side Story. The Masons on the east side of Paris didn't get along with the Knights on the west side of Paris.
Okay, I'll have to read some proceedings about that.
All right. You have a good night, Jason, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.
All right, you guys take care. Thank you again.